Hey boys and girls, welcome back. It's a beautiful day outside and I hope you've had a great day with your family. When we left off yesterday, we were reading about Sophie and the giant barely escaping being tousled about by the human bean-eating giants, and he whisked her away to a special place called Dream Country, and that's where we're going to pick up reading today. This chapter is called Dream Catching. The big friendly giant put the suitcase on the ground. He bent down low so that his enormous face was close to Sophie's. "From now on, we is keeping as still as winky little miceys," he whispered. Sophie nodded. The misty vapor swirled around her. It made her cheeks damp and left dewdrops in her hair. The BFG opened the suitcase and took out several empty glass jars. He set them ready on the ground with their screw tops removed. Then he stood up very straight. His head was now high up in the swirling mist, and it kept disappearing and then reappearing again. He was holding the long net in his right hand. Sophie, staring upwards, saw through the mist that his colossal ears were beginning to swivel out from his head. They began waving gently to and fro. Suddenly the BFG pounced. He leaped high in the air and swung the net through the mist with a great swishing sweep of his arm. "Got him!" he cried. "A jar! A jar! Quick, quick!" Sophie picked up a jar and held it up to him. He grabbed hold of it and he lowered the net. Very carefully he tipped something absolutely invisible from the net into the jar. He dropped the net and swiftly clapped one hand over the jar. "The top!" he whispered. "The jar top, quick!" Sophie picked up the screw top and handed it to him. He screwed it on tight and the jar was closed. The BFG was very excited. He held the jar close to one ear and listened intently. "It's a wink squiffler," he whispered with a thrill in his voice. It's even better. It's a fizz wizard. It's a golden fizz wizard." Sophie stared at him. Oh my, he said, holding the jar in front of him. "This will be giving some little toddler a very happy night when I is blowing it in." "Is it really a good one?" Sophie asked. "A good one?" he cried. "It's a golden fizz wizard. It is not often I is getting one of these." He handed the jar to Sophie and said, "Please be as still as a starfish now. I is thinking there may be a whole swarm of fizz wizards up here today. And do kindly stop breathing. You is terribly noisy down there." "But I haven't moved a single muscle," Sophie said. "Then don't," the BFG answered sharply. Once again he stood up tall in the mist, holding his net at ready. Then came the long silence, the waiting, the listening, and at last, with surprising suddenness, came the leap and the swish of the net. "Another jar!" he cried. "Quick, quick, quick!" And when the second dream was safely in the jar and the top was screwed down, the BFG held it to his ear. "Oh no!" he cried. "Oh, mince my maggots! Oh, swipe my swoggles!" "What's the matter?" Sophie asked. "It's a troggle humper!" he shouted. His voice was filled with fury and anguish. "Oh, save our solos!" he cried. "Deliver us from weasels! The devil is dancing on my dibbler." "What are you talking about?" Sophie said. The BFG was getting more distressed every moment. "Oh, bash my eye bones!" he cried. With the jar in the air, "I come all this way to get lovely golden dreams, and what is I catching?" "What are you catching?" Sophie said. "I is catching a frightsome troggle humper," he cried. "This is a bad, bad dream. It's worse than a bad dream. It's a nightmare." "Oh dear," Sophie said. "What will you do with that?" "I's never letting it go," the BFG cried. "If I do, then some little poor toddler will be having the most curdle-blooding time. This one is a real kicksy bottom thumper. I's exploding it as soon as I get home." "Nightmares are horrible," Sophie said. "I had once and I woke up sweating all over." With this one, you would be waking up screaming all over, the BFG said. This one will make your teeth stand on end. If this one got into you, your blood would be freezing to icicles and your skin would be creeping across the floor. It is as bad as that? It's worse, cried the BFG. This is a real wopsy grop switcher. You said it was a trogglehumper, Sophie told him. It is a trogglehumper, cried the exasperated BFG. But it's also a bog thumper and a grop switcher. It's all three riddled into one. Oh, I was glad I was clutching it tight. Ah, you weasty beastie, you said, he cried, holding up the jar and staring into it. Never more is you going to be bung-doodling this poor little human beanie toddlers. Sophie, who was also staring into the glass jar, cried, Oh, I can see it. There's something in there. Of course there's something in there, the BFG said. You was looking at a frightsome trogglehumper. But you told me dreams are invisible. They is always invisible until they is captured, the BFG told her. After that, there is losing some of their visible, and then they're captured, and there's losing a little of their invisibility, and we assume this one very clearly. Inside the jar, Sophie could see the faint scarlet outline of something that looked like a mixture between a blob of gas and a bubble of jelly. It was moving violently, thrashing against the sides of the jar and forever changing shapes. There's a little picture here of Sophie looking at the jar. It's wiggling all over the place, Sophie cried. It's fighting to get out. It's going to bash itself to bits. The nastier the dream, the angrier it is getting when it's in prison, the BFG said. It's the same as with wild animals. If a wild animal is fierce and you's putting it in a cage, it makes a tremendous rumple-dumpus. If it's a nice animal like a cock-a-doodle-doo or a froggle-fromp, it'll sit quietly. Dreams is exactly the same. This one is a nasty, fierce, begrotting nightmare. Just look at him splashing himself against the glass. It's quite frightening, Sophie cried. I would be hating to get this one inside me on a darksome night, the BFG said. So would I, Sophie said. The BFG started putting the bottles back into the suitcase. Is that all? Sophie asked. Are we going? I was so upset by this troggle-thumping, bug-thumping grog switcher, the BFG said, that I was not wishing to go on. Dream-catching is finished for today. Soon Sophie was back in the waistcoat pocket, and the BFG was racing home as fast as he could. When at last they emerged out of the mist and came again onto the hot yellow wasteland, all the other giants were sprawled out on the ground, fast asleep. Now, I brought a dream-catching jar. Can you see the dream inside of it? What color does it look like to you? Do you think it's a fizz wizard or a trogglehumper? Next time when you see an empty jar like this, maybe look twice and see if you see a dream inside. Now, if you had a dream and it was all described in colors, think about what that would look like. Maybe sometime today you could draw an outline of a jar on a piece of paper and think about the crayons that would match the color dream that you would want to have at night. I think if I were having a dream at night and it was a fizz wizard and it was a good dream, I would want it to be yellow and orange and purple and blue and all kinds of really pretty colors. Now give me a second, guys, because for this sun, as much as it's awesome, it's kind of blinding me over here too. So I'm going to kind of close some of these shades just real quickly. I don't want to get it too dark. There we go. Okay, that's a little better. All right, we're going to move on to our next chapter called A Trogglehumper for the Flesh Lump Eater. They is always having 50 winks before they go scumpering off to human beings in the evening, the BFG said. He stopped for a few moments to let Sophie have a better look. Giants is only sleeping every then and now, he said, not nearly as much as human beings. Human beings is crazy for sleeping. It is ever occurring to you that a human being who is 50 is spending about 20 years sleeping fast? I must admit that never occurred to me, Sophie said. You should allow it to occur to you, the BFG said. Imagine it, please. This human being who says he is 50 has been fast asleep for 20 years and is not even knowing where he is, not even doing anything, not even thinking. It's a funny thought, Sophie said. Exactly, the BFG said. So what I is trying to explain to you is that a human being who says he is 50 is not 50. He is only 30. What about me? Sophie said. I'm 8. You is not 8 at all, the BFG said. Human beings, babies, and little chittlers is spending half their time sleeping. So you is only 4. I'm 8, Sophie said. You may think you're 8, the BFG said, but you has only spent 4 years of your life with your little eyes open. You is only 4, and please stop higgling me. Titchy little snapper whippers like you should not be higgling around with old sage and onions who is hundreds of years more than you. How much do giants sleep? Sophie asked. They is never wasting much time snozzling, the BFG said. 2 or 3 hours is enough. When do you sleep? Sophie asked. Even less, the BFG answered. I is sleeping only once in a blue baboon. Sophie, peeping out from her pocket, examined the 9 sleeping giants. They looked even more grotesque now than when they were awake. Sprawled out across the yellow plain, they covered an area about the size of a football field. Most of them were lying on their backs with their enormous mouths wide open, and they were snoring like foghorns. The noise was awful. Suddenly the BFG gave a jump in the air. By gum frog, he cried, I was just having the most wopsy whiffling idea. What? Sophie said. Wait, he cried. Hold your horse feathers. Keep your skirt on. Just you wait to see what I is going to bring about. He galloped off fast to his cave with Sophie hanging on tight to the rim of the pocket. He rolled back the stone and he entered the cave. He was very excited. He was moving quickly. You stay where you is in my pocket, Huggy Bee, he said. We is doing this lovely bit of buck swashling both together. He laid aside the dream-catching net, but hung on to the suitcase. He ran across to the other side of the cave and grabbed the long trumpet thing, the one he'd been carrying when Sophie had first seen him in the village. With the suitcase in one hand and the trumpet in the other, he dashed out of the cave. What is he up to now? Sophie wondered. Peep your head up good, the BFG said. Then you will get a fine winkle of what is going on. When the BFG came near to the sleeping giants, he slowed his pace. He began moving softly. He crept on his toes toward the ugly brutes. They were still snoring loudly. They looked repulsive and filthy and diabolical. The BFG tiptoed around them. He went past the gizzard gulper and the blood bottler, the meat dripper, the child chewer, and then he stopped. He had reached the flesh lump eater. He pointed at him and then he looked down at Sophie and gave her a big wink. What do you think he's about to do? He knelt on the ground and very quietly he opened the suitcase. He took out of it the glass jar containing the terrible nightmarish trogglehumphers. At that point, Sophie guessed what was going to happen next. Ouch, she thought. This could be rather dangerous. She crouched lower in the pocket so that only the top of her head and her eyes were showing. She wanted to be ready to duck out of sight very fast should anything go wrong. They were about 10 feet away from the flesh lump eater's face. The snoring, snorting noise he was making was disgusting. Every now and then a big bubble of spit formed up between his 2 open lips, and then it would burst with a splash and cover his face with saliva. Taking infinite care, the BFG unscrewed the top of the glass jar and tipped the squiggling, squirming, faintly scarlet trogglehumper into the wide end of his long trumpet. He put the other end of the trumpet to his lips. He aimed the instrument directly at the flesh lump eater's face. He took a deep breath, puffed out his cheeks, and then woof, he blew. Sophie saw a flash of pale red go darting toward the giant's face. For a split second, it hovered above his face, and then it was gone. It seemed to have been sucked up the giant's nose, but it had all happened so quickly, Sophie couldn't be for sure. "We had better be skiddling away quick to where it is safe," the BFG whispered. He trotted off for about 100 yards, and then he stopped. He crouched low to the earth. "Now," he said, "we is waiting for the gun and flames to begin." They didn't have to wait long. Here's a picture of the BFG blowing that trogglehumper into the giant's face. The air was suddenly pierced by the most fearful roar Sophie had ever heard, and then she saw the flesh lump eater's body, all 54 feet of it, rise up off the ground and fall back again with a thump. Then it began to wriggle and twist and bounce about in the most violent fashion, and it was quite frightening to watch. "Oh!" roared the flesh lump eater. "Oh!" "He's still asleep," the BFG whispered. "The terrible troggle-humping nightmare is beginning to hit him." "Serves him right," Sophie said. She could feel no sympathy for this great brute who ate children as though they were sugar lumps. "Save us!" screamed the flesh lump eater, thrashing about mightily. "He's after me! He's getting me!" The thrashing of limbs and the waving of arms became more violent by the second. It was an awesome sight to see such a massive creature having such a mighty convulsions. "It's Jack!" bellowed the flesh lump eater. "It's the gruesome, grunctious Jack! Jack is after me! Jack is whack cackling me! Jack is spike sticking me! Jack is splash splunking me! It's the terrible, fright swiping Jack!" The flesh lump eater was writhing about all over the ground like some colossal tortured snake. "Oh, spare me, Jack!" he yelled. "Don't hurt me, Jack!" "Who is this Jack he's talking about?" Sophie whispered. "Jack is the only human being all giants is frightened of," the BFG told her. "They is all absolutely terrified of Jack. They is all hearing that Jack is a famous giant killer." "Save me!" screamed the flesh lump eater. "Have mercy on this poor little giant. The beanstalk, he's coming at me with this terrible spike-sticking beanstalk. Take it away, I is begging you, Jack. I is praying you not touch me with your terrible spike-sticking beanstalk." "Us giants," the BFG whispered, "is not knowing very much about this dreaded human being called Jack. We is knowing only that he is a famous giant killer and that he is owning something called a beanstalk. We is knowing also that the beanstalk is a fearsome thing and Jack is using it to kill giants." Sophie couldn't stop smiling. "What is you giggling about?" the BFG asked her, slightly settled. "I'll tell you later," Sophie said. The awful nightmare had now gripped the great brute to such an extent that he was tying his whole body into knots. "Don't do it, Jack!" he screeched. "I was not eating you, Jack. I was never eating human beings. I swear I was never gobbled a single human being all my wholesome life." "Liar," said the BFG. Just then the flesh lump eater's flailing fist caught the fast asleep, meat-dripping giant smack in the mouth. At the same time, one of his furious thrash legs kicked the snoring, gizzard-gulping giant right in the guts. Both the injured giants woke up and leaped to their feet. "He is wiping me right in my mouth," yelled the meat dripper. "He's bung-swaggling me smack in the guts," shouted the gizzard-gulper. The two of them rushed at the flesh lump eater and began pounding him with their fists and feet. The wretched flesh lump eater woke up with a bang. He awoke straight from one nightmare into another. He roared into battle, and in the bellowing, thumping rough and tumble that followed, one sleeping giant after another got stepped on or kicked. Soon all 9 of them were on their feet, having the most almighty free-for-all. Check this out. They are going to town on each other. They punched and kicked and scratched and bit and butted each other as hard as they could. Blood flowed, noses crunched, teeth fell out like hailstones. The giants roared and screamed and cursed, and for many minutes the noise of the battle rolled across the yellow plains. The BFG smiled a big, wide smile of absolute pleasure. "I is loving it when they is all having a good toughin' rumble," he said. "They'll kill each other," Sophie said. "Never," the BFG answered. "Those beasts is always bishing and walloping one another. Soon it'll be getting dusky and they'll be galloping off to fill their tummies." "They're coarse and foul and filthy," Sophie said. "I hate them." As the BFG headed back to the cave, he said quietly, "We certainly was putting that nightmare to good use, wasn't we?" "Excellent use," Sophie said. "Well done, you BFG." That's where we'll stop today. Now, if you don't know who Jack the Giant Killer is that the giants were so afraid of, ask your parents or maybe Google a YouTube and find the fairy tale or maybe the story of Jack and the Beanstalk, and you'll find out why the giants were so afraid. Anyway, we'll stop for today and we'll pick back up again tomorrow. Have a great day.